want to do is, first I'm going to introduce one of our friends here, and our steering committee vice chair and incoming chair for next year, Paula Silla, is going to take over and introduce our next story circle. I also want to let people know that, as Dr. Underwood mentioned earlier, we are inviting everyone into the space, and as they can join us, and so we are going to have a number of individuals come and join us during this session. So just as Dr. Underwood said, welcome them, and we are so glad that they can join us, but just wanted to let you know. All right, Paula, thank you.
So I'm going to welcome you back by just taking one deep cleansing breath. We're doing this because it helps me to relax and just talk naturally and not be all stressed as well. So one large cleansing breath. Thank you for that. So I'm very excited to introduce our first story circle, Centering the Voices of Survivors. We're honored to be joined by 5 storytellers who will be offering powerful personal stories about their cancer journeys. We are grateful to each of our storytellers for the courage and vulnerability they will be sharing with us today. This story circle is moderated by Wisconsin Cancer Collaborative Steering Committee member Crystal Landros. A transplant from the Southwest, Crystal moved to Milwaukee in 2015. As a bilingual public health professional who is committed to diversity, equity, and inclusion, Crystal has worked for more than 10 years to bridge the gap between marginalized communities and the services they need through partnerships, collaboration, support, and education. Welcome and thank you for moderating this session, Crystal.
Good morning. Thank you so much for that introduction, Paul. I'm super excited to be here. I was able to make it from Milwaukee. Hey! All right, so first up we have Ms. Bernadette Priestley. She's a patient, a speaker, and an educator. She was diagnosed with stage 4 metastatic breast cancer in December of 2017. She has 2 boys and works in Middleton School. Now she speaks and advocates around second opinions for breast cancer patients. So Bernadette, over to you.
Thanks. Some of the first words that I heard after I was diagnosed with cancer was, you'll be lucky if you live 3 years. I didn't care at that time that she said that. I thought, it's okay if she's honest, it's okay if she's frank, I like numbers, I wanted to know. And I sort of thought, I don't care what her bedside manner's like. I only care if she's good at her job. And so when she said, you'll be lucky if you live 3 years, I said, make me lucky. And I was 37. My kids were 2 and 4. And looking back, I realized that probably wasn't a good thing to open with. And I guess now that I'm so much further out from that situation, I realize that it was absolutely not the way to start that conversation. And that sort of led to a huge change in not only me as a patient, but me as a person. And I have come to realize that everybody who's diagnosed with cancer, everybody has a story, and most of them are a series of unfortunate events. There's so much to learn. The learning curve is so high. The stress is so high. The anxiety is through the roof. And so you don't necessarily know what to ask, when to ask, how to ask it. But that first interaction changed the course of my disease. And I was diagnosed stage 4 metastatic, so I was stage 4 right away. And within a couple months of that initial appointment, I was having some pain. And I went to go see my oncologist, and they told me that my pain, they believed, was psychosomatic. So they put me on 2 to 3 Xanax a day. And I took 2 to 3 Xanax a day because that's what the bottle said, and I was new at this. And I slept for like 4 days. And my mom is a nurse, and she said, Bernadette, what did they give you? And I was like, they gave me this. And she was like, oh my God, like, you should not be taking that much of this. This is Xanax. And I was like, oh, like that's why this happened. And that was sort of like the second red flag that I had. So just for reference, I now take a quarter of a tablet if I'm feeling anxious. And that is enough for me. So to prescribe me 2 to 3 was rather ridiculous. And it was shortly after I had that pain that I had my first set of scans and I had progression. So my pain was not psychosomatic. And when I went to get the results for that scan, she told me, don't worry, it's just a little cancer. And I was at that appointment by myself, and I remember not only did I get bad scan results, my kids were now 3 and 5. I had blown my first course of treatment in 3 months. As a metastatic patient, you want to stay on any course of treatment for as long as you can, because there are only finite options for me. So we switched to an oral chemo, and I stayed on that again for 3 months. I was on autopilot by that point. I had mentally checked out. I wasn't present for my kids. And I trusted her. Like, I thought, well, she knows what she's doing. She's working at one of the best hospitals in the country. Like, this is definitely where I should be. And I had scans 3 months later, and they showed more progression. And I remember reading the notes, and it said innumerable, and I vomited. So I went in, and they were like, you have to move to IV chemo. And I was 6 months into a metastatic diagnosis. I was under the general impression that that was the last line of treatment. I'm still under that impression, actually. You know, you can only do that so long, and as a metastatic patient, it's not like you undergo 6 treatments, it's the rest of your life. So I was acutely aware that that was not the position I wanted to find myself in 6 months after diagnosis, especially since I felt fine. Like, there was nothing. I had no pain, I didn't look sick, I didn't generally feel sick. And so it was at that point that I thought, I need a second opinion. This is the time to get a second opinion. And on the way home, I called my friend Kelly, who is another stage 4 patient and advocate, and she said, you have to talk to Tim. You have to talk to Tim. You have to go see him. And I was hysterical. I was considering not doing IV chemo. I was at the end of my tether. It had been 6 months, and it seemed like every single appointment I had, things just got worse. Like, we never got to a point where there was any improvement. And so she said, I'm gonna message him, call him on this number. And I hung up the phone, I got home, I stayed outside, and by the time I walked into my house, he had called me. And he is in Kansas City. And he said, when can you get here? Can you be here tomorrow? And I was like, Wisconsin, Kansas City, where is it? Like, sure is my general answer to things. Like, yeah, I can get to Kansas City tomorrow. And my best friend was visiting from London, and I was like, hey, guess what? Remember how we thought we were going to Great America tomorrow? We're totally driving to Kansas City. And he came with me. And we got in the car that night, and we drove down, and we stayed at a hotel that we found, like, that night. And I remember I wasn't, like, a functioning person. I remember that Dan, almost like in a toddler-like tantrum, dragged me into that appointment. Like, he was pulling my arm and I was digging in my heels. I did not want to do this. And I had scans that morning in Kansas City, and while I was in the scan machine, I thought about something that a UW nurse navigator told me. She was called Jane. She said I should have a wedding dress moment if I was stage 4. And that I should just know that this is my team, these are my people, I trust them, I'm trusting them to look after me. And as soon as Dr. Plura walked in, I had that moment. And I felt better. He reviewed his own scans, and he said that he wasn't sure that I had progression. He said he wanted me to stay on my current treatment for another 2 months, that we would scan again. And 2 months later, when I went back down to Kansas City, I was drastically improved. And 3 months, when I went back again for scans, I was NEAD. And for those of us that are metastatic, it means no evidence of active disease. And that was this full circle moment for me. Had I not sought that second opinion, I would not be here today. I would never have tolerated 4 years of chemo. Well, IV chemo, because I am still on that line of treatment. I am now a Zelda unicorn, kind of. I tolerate it well. It continues to work. I haven't had any issues. My response is amazing. My side effects are few. And I remember telling Tim that when I was diagnosed, my big goal, after hearing that I was only going to live for 3 years, if I was lucky, was to get my youngest son to kindergarten. And then COVID hit. And I had the chance to not only get into kindergarten, but also be his teacher, because he was going to be home for that year. And I said to my husband, I was like, I'm not missing this. Like, this was my goal. I'm doing this. And so he is a bit of a flighty kid. So we walked him out the back door of our house on the first day of school. And my husband, we live 5 houses from our school, so he thought he was walking up there, that he was some sort of special kid that was actually going to get to go. And we walked them around the house, and then they turned the corner and came back to our house. And I stood outside, and he was like, huh? And I was like, I'm your teacher. Welcome to kindergarten. And I sent the video to Tim, and I just said, the work you do, the devotion you have, it is so immensely appreciated. And he said, let's get him to high school. And I look at the dichotomy of those comments. You'll be lucky if you live 3 years. Let's get him to high school. And I know where I would rather be, right? But it changed me. When he started talking to me like that, it changed me as a person. I was able to go back to work because I thought, why not? He asked me, well, what do you think you're going to do for the next 5 to 10 years? I have conversations with him about the future. And I feel confident that we'll get there. And I think that when you interact with patients, if you interact with patients, you could be that person. Instead of saying, you will be lucky if you live 3 years, what she should have said is, you are not a statistic. Don't look at the numbers. Your survival is dependent upon your response to your meds. And guess what? There's more coming. She should have talked to me about trials that were coming down the pipeline for my subtype. She should have told me that science is moving quickly. She should have reassured me, and she should have told me that for people like me, the 6 to 10% of us that are diagnosed stage 4 from the gates, research suggests that it's not that I didn't wait too long. Research suggests that that metastatic spread was happening at the same time my initial tumor was forming. But she chose to tell me that I'd be lucky if I got to 3 years. She chose to tell me that it was just a little cancer. And that's not okay. So I want you to know that the comments that are made that are off the cuff, maybe flippant, maybe she just looked at my chart, we hear them and they play on repeat in my head to this day. Tim can talk to me all he wants about what he expects based on my response to my second line. But I still hear her voice tell me that I would be lucky to be here. So if you have the chance to improve someone's life who's already going through something ridiculously hard, do it. And know that your words matter, and know that we're listening, and know the effect that it can have on us. Had I sought his opinion at the very beginning, I can't imagine the time that I would have got back. 6 months is a lot to me. It's a lot to my kids. It was a lot to my husband. It was a lot to my mom. And it didn't have to happen that way. So I guess my story is now that I help other people get to where I was. I help them seek a second opinion. I help them find other doctors. I help them make sure that they're participating in their care. Because had I not done that, I wouldn't have seen Oscar get to kindergarten or start 3rd grade this year.
Thank you. You are so brave and so inspirational. Thank you so much for sharing your story. And so next up, we have Ms. Egan-Waukau. As the Milwaukee Native Vote Organizer and a member of the Menominee Indian Tribe of Wisconsin, she fosters relationships with Native American Indian relatives and organizations through respect, humility, honesty, and humor. She learned from her father, Hillary Sparky Waukau, that relationships are key in the fight to protect the rights of Native people, as well as Mother Earth's resources and perpetuity. Anne started developing relationships with her relatives. All Native American Indians are related, when she attended Marquette University. This continued while she worked as a reporter for the Milwaukee Sentinel, now the Milwaukee Journal Sentinel, was the media relations specialist for the Wisconsin Education Association Council, now working with the Wisconsin Conservation of Voices. She maintains and continues to develop relation contacts, serving on Native boards and volunteering for various organizations that help our Native families, and is currently the vice chair of the Gerald L. Ignis Indian Health Center's Board of Directors. So welcome, Anne.
Thank you, Bernadette. That's awesome. And I have to tell you that, I'm sorry, Bernadette, your story was great. Thank you, Crystal, for the intro. Bernadette, your story was very awesome and inspiring, and it's a great message. 3 years, right? My story, first of all, so for having me here, I am the daughter of Hillary and Edith Sparky Waukau, born and raised on the Menominee Reservation. I left when I turned 18 to go to Marquette. I have 2 stories I want to tell. First, this is really cool. I was looking at my emails as I was driving, really smart, given the accident on 94, And I had a notification from one of my surgeons that it's time for my checkup next month. I'm like, I forgot about it. Yikes, and I'm a survivor. But I have 2 stories to tell. One is my sister Kim Mokochewea, or spirit woman, and one is mine. Let's start with my sister Kim. 34 years ago, 29-year-old Kim found a lump. She went to the doctor, didn't think it was serious, and then it grew. In the summer, she noticed it was getting bigger. So she finally went in November after much prodding from us. And the doctor suspected that it could be cancer, so he sent her to a specialist, and she had a biopsy in January. So from November to January. Wow, times have changed, huh? And he said, do you want us to give you the results first, or do you want us to do the surgery? She said, just do the surgery. And so we all found out before, my family that was there found out before she did, so they all went in tough and not crying, and then I came in later, and I gave her a hug, and she goes, Ann, you can believe it? Can you believe it? I said, Kim, we're gonna get you through this. And then in 2 hours she was laughing. She was she had this life of, the gift of humor and friendship and kindness. And her struggle was long and hard. The doctor did biopsies on the lymph nodes, and she had, out of 11, 9 were cancerous, so they said she had 5 years. Well, unfortunately at that time on my reservation, cancer was a death sentence because people didn't go in for treatment, we didn't have the health care we have now. And it's sad, but that's how it was back then. Mark may not remember that, but it was, and it's much better now. Kim brought something beautiful to our world. She brought our family back to our culture, traditional medicines, traditional healings, traditional prayers, and that brought us all much closer to us and her, and helping her leave this earth. Laughter again was a big part of this, but the most heartbreaking was watching my mother as she passed. We were all in the room. She said she can't go until all her sisters are there, and there was one sister, and she was getting close, we could tell. And got Lenore in there, and as soon as Lenore got in there, then she passed away. And she was 33 years old. She said, I thought I was gonna get 5 years, I only got 4. And you know, that was hard. It had metastasized into her liver. And it was just a very sad time. And we got through it though. We survived because we all realized we had to get mammograms as of that point, so I got them every 6 months after that. My sister did say it was helpful to Kim and us that her doctor was very handsome and very nice, so we had fun with him, believe me. So now comes my story. I always got those mammograms. I happened to miss 1 year in 2019. And in 2020, in March, I found a lump, and I'm like, this doesn't look good. I'd had a couple lumps before, but this one, I'm like, doesn't feel right. And I saw Dr. Ignace, who's the CEO of Gerald L. Ignace Indian Health Center. We will meet at lunchtime. He's phenomenal, and he said, get it out, just get it out. So I talked to my doctor. I got in right away with Dr. Lull, and they did the mammogram and the, what do they call it? The, no, not like, it was this, where they do this screening at the, I can't even think about it, but anyway, she said, I'm not a technical girl, I'm just about fun, okay? And they said, this is cancerous, and I did blood work and sought treatment, and I had my surgery within a week. She actually got me in right away. And so immediately I had a wonderful team of doctors and nurses who just took great care of me. And for me, when I found out it was cancer, the hardest part was calling my sisters. Because it killed us when our sister Kim left. We were all so close. There were 8 of us. Now we got 6 of us left. But we were all very close, and it hurt, and I called my sister. I said, guess what? Tita, I got cancer. Geez, Ann, why didn't you tell us you were going through this? I said, I didn't want to worry you guys because I thought it might be nothing. So I didn't cry, but then I called my next sister, and I called Lori, and I said, Lori, I got cancer, but I'm going to be okay. I caught it early. She started crying, I started crying, and then I said, can you guys just spread the word? So we have a family of 11 members left out of 13, so they did the grapevine, and boy, I was a topic of discussion that day. But I was strong, I didn't cry. It was hard telling my daughter and my son. They had a hard time, but they hid it from me, and I hid as much as I could from them. And my husband, it hurt him, he didn't know how to handle it. I'm like, it's not a big deal. I had chemo, got to see what my head looked like. I always wanted to see that. And I was like, hey, it's not so bad. My hair grew back, look. My eyelashes didn't, but that's okay. Never had any anyway. Nor eyebrow, that's an Indian trait I have. But, you know, the fight was amazing because it was like I was having a living wake. Dr. Ignace and his wife brought over a huge basket of wonderful gifts for me and my family. And I saw them out my window. We call it the hospital room, and I was staying in the room that's on the first floor, so by the bathroom, kitchen, everything. And I looked out the window and I saw this, as my dad would call him, riffraff, and a woman walking to my porch and then putting something on and leaving. And I'm like, who the heck is that? And went out the door, and it was Dr. Ignace and his wife. And it was so awesome. And I said, you guys, thank you. Okay, this is COVID, by the way, 2020. So everyone didn't want to come in, but they would stop at the door. And it was so wonderful they did that. And then the Sentinel chicks came over, and one of them had cancer twice, breast cancer. And they came and dropped off a couple baskets, but they stayed outside talking. It was just wonderful. And the prayers I received, Mark Denning, he had a unity fire for me, and I will never forget that whole day. I just prayed, and Brother Mark, that helped a lot. He's my baby. I've known him since he was 18. We're a year apart, so I'm his elder now. He's got to listen to me. That's why I was his timekeeper. 5 minutes, Mark. But and people were sending dinners over, and I was getting calls and wonderful postcards. I have about 100 postcards on my wall that I still have, just as a thank you to my people. And prayer became so strong, and smudging. My son would smudge me. My son was a big part of this. He wants to be a child psychiatrist to work with our Native kids. He's right now working for a year at Rogers. He just graduated pre-med from Marquette. But I was in my room, and I was really sick, and I wasn't feeling well, and I was crying. I did not like them to see me cry. And he said, Mom, we're going for a ride. I said, I can't. Well, I don't feel good. He goes, Mom, get up, we're going for a ride. I said, you bossed me around. I'm your mom, I'm not going. And he's like, you're going. So I got him, I'm like, okay. So I got in the car, we went down to the lakefront, and it was the most wonderful, cathartic thing he could have done. We did that often, and we'd talk, I'd argue with him, and then we'd talk and laugh, and he'd argue with me. But that air and the water for us is very healing as women, and always being by the water meant a lot to me. And putting down my daily tobacco and my prayers, and that helped a lot. And I learned that from my sisters Kim's tragedy, but the beauty of Kim was she was just so beautiful, and her spirit stays with us. She's a lovely woman, and she taught me a lot. And she was a year before me, and she said, you know, I always have to go through everything first, be it the first kiss, period, you know, all that. She did it first. So when she was passing, I got to spend a couple minutes with her. And she looked at me and she said, it was the night before she passed, she goes, I'm going to see you again. Remember, I have to go first. I'll be waiting. What a lovely message from a wonderful sister. Now, why am I crying? God, I'm just happy. And I will never forget that. And, you know, I maintain my checkups now. I thank all my dear friends here. Carol Cameron, you were awesome too. Very, very wonderful friends. My friends at Glick, my friends at the Sentinel, my friends at you know, everyone was just wonderful, but Mark, again, you were so wonderful. My journey has a happy ending. I'm still alive. I'm not going to go anywhere. My doctor told me that 3 years, if anyone's going to get my cancer back that I had, it would be within 3 years. So April's my third, will be 3 years, so I'm going to be fine. And by the way, I had some pretty good looking doctors too. Dr. Johnson, Dr. Butts, they were very nice. Dr. Law's beautiful. So I guess you have to be good looking to treat my family. Remember that. That's it. And Wang Wan and Miigwech, thank you for having me here and listening to my story.
It was wonderful, and thank you so much for sharing your stories. And then next up we have Dr. Jacqui Regenbogen. She is the founder and CEO of Three Breaths Consulting, where she advises organizations in diversity, inclusion, and belonging. One of her specialties is collaborating to create welcoming and inclusive environments for employees experiencing cancer and other chronic illnesses. Having nearly 2 decades of professional experience in the field of diversity and inclusion, she couldn't stop herself from bringing an equity lens to her own experience of stage 3 breast cancer nearly 5 years ago. So welcome, Dr. Jacqui Regenbogen.
Hi, everybody. Hi. So I've adopted a colon response. Hi, everybody. Awesome. Thank you so much. I think, first of all, I want to thank the other folks who've spoken before me. I'm reminded every day, especially in the month of October, how prevalent breast cancer is, but then thinking about being on a panel of survivors and thrivers talking about it, when it's not even the topic is breast cancer, it really brings it home to me about its prevalence, and that's just shit, and we need to do better. I'm just gonna say it. Sorry, the Cancer Stories performance was last night, and there was a lot of swearing in it, which was wonderful in my opinion. So I apologize, and I'll try to have that be my one time. So, you've heard already a fair amount about breast cancer, so I'm not actually going to talk a ton about my experience specifically with breast cancer. I do want to say, if there are 3 things that I really want to leave you with today. The first is echoing what Bernadette said in terms of the importance of words, the importance of language that you use when you're interacting with people who are experiencing cancer. I'll go into that in a little bit. The second one is that I think that cancer takes away a lot more than we can imagine. Cancer, in my case, took away a dream to have children, and I will never be able to have that. And that is a grief that I live every day, that I'm grieving something that will never be. So that is part of my story, and I guess the other part of my story is thinking about survivors and the treatment that we have to save our lives sometimes has costs down the road that we can't even imagine at the time. So I want to talk a little bit about that, but also about resilience. So that's the frame that I'm going to use today. First of all, I am a big old lesbian, so y'all should know that. Sometimes, thank you for clapping, that's awesome! I often pass as straight, so I feel like I always need to out myself, so I'm a big old queer up here. I say that in part because it's an important part of my story, not that in my treatment that I faced homophobia. I don't feel that way. What I feel is that throughout my cancer journey, there was a presumption of heterosexuality, which I'm going to get to in a minute. I never had a lump. I had some breast changes in my left breast. It was sort of like a hardening of my breast, but something that's really important to keep in mind, at the time, my wife and I were trying to get me pregnant, and by that point I had been inseminated 9 times. 9 inseminations. I was 38 when I was diagnosed, but about 36 when we started trying to have a child. I had been thoroughly checked out, that even had a hydroscopy. I don't know if there's any women here who had that fun procedure, but that's where they put water through your fallopian tubes, and it was so painful that they had to put me on like some kind of twilight medicine. I don't know. That was intense. The point being, we'd been through a lot just to try to have a kid, and a lot of money too. So when my breast was changing, I assumed, because nobody in my family had breast cancer, right? I grew up in the 80s and 90s where, I was told to check for lumps, check for lumps. Well, it was never a lump, so I'm like, I can't be cancer, I'm healthy, I'm young. I thought it was the hormones that I was on to help. Why would I think anything different, right? Now, of course, I know so much more, but hindsight, right? So I went into my doctor, and I saw his face change. This was October of 2017. I saw his face change. He did a manual exam. He said, I'm gonna get you into radiology today. I'm very concerned about this. So I was like, oh my God, this is terrible, right? Like, I couldn't get a hold of my wife, I couldn't get a hold of my two best friends, and I couldn't get a hold of my mom. So I'm just sitting there, right? Like waiting, oh my God, are they gonna tell me I have cancer? Well, as was not necessarily the standard of care, but because the place I was going at that time for treatment was, I believe, this is my personal belief, I can't prove this, but because they are affiliated with the Catholic Church, and we were still waiting on a pregnancy test, and I had just been inseminated, they would not do a mammogram. They would not do a mammogram because of the potential risk to the maybe unborn being that might be inside me. So instead, they chose to do an ultrasound. And the ultrasound tech took a really, really long time. I was crying for most of it. And then, waiting for the results, the radiologist came in and said, I have great news. You have really dense breast tissue. A mammogram will never detect cancer in your breast because your breast tissue is so dense. So this is probably just from the hormones. I think this is absolutely nothing for you to worry about. But if you're really worried, if you're really concerned, maybe come back in a few months. I would have a medical malpractice case if I did not live in Wisconsin. But because the Supreme Court has put a limit on damages, some of the best places in the state for any kind of personal injury, etc., they won't take the case because it's not going to be worth it for them. If I lived in Michigan, if I lived in Illinois, if I lived in Minnesota, absolutely would have a medical malpractice case. So, fast forward to January 25th, and I had to wait around my menstrual cycle to be able to get an MRI. So, got an MRI. The doctor didn't call all day. So I thought, oh great, because they told me if he doesn't call by 5 p.m. He called at 5:25 and he said, are you sitting down? This is 99.9% cancer, and it is huge. It is 10 centimeters by 5 centimeters by 7 centimeters. And we don't know, but we think it's in your lymph nodes as well. So, that was a shock, but I want to say to anyone in here who has not been diagnosed with cancer, had I not been that paranoid, hysterical woman and listened to my body and followed up, I would either not be here or I would be living with an incurable disease. So I cannot stress enough the importance, please listen to your body. Your body has wisdom. It has things to tell you about what's going on. And don't let anyone who's a so-called expert convince you that you're making too big of a deal about something. Because wouldn't it just be better if you went in for that MRI anyway and found out that it wasn't anything, right? So, I love how I'm not gonna talk that much about breast cancer. Here's all about breast cancer. The next part of my story though is about, I found out the same day that I had stage 3C breast cancer, that I could never have children. So that, the fear of dying and the knowledge that I'll never be able to carry a child, to me, it was like boom, it was double whammy, instantaneous. You believe one thing about your life, and then reality hands you something completely different. So I was trying to make peace with that, but then every single scan, everything I had to go into, they would ask me, is there a possibility you could be pregnant? Is there a possibility you could be pregnant? I'm going through cancer treatment. Is there a possibility you could be pregnant? And I started crying every single time, and I told them to put into my Epic chart, permanently infertile, monogamous, lesbian. there is no chance that I am pregnant, please stop asking me. And it still happens every time. I don't know where it is in my chart, but I've had nurses point it out. So it's not just, I'm thrilled to be here, right? Of course, I'm so happy to be alive. I'm so grateful to the doctors, the amazing care that I had. And can we do a little bit better? Because I'm still a person, right? And the pain of that infertility, that's never gonna leave me. I can try and deal with it, I can do trauma-informed, therapy, etc. But I just wanna encourage us to think about that may be a simple thing because your health system doesn't wanna get sued, but can you get that information another way? Just something to think about. In conclusion, as I said, I'm now almost 5 years out. It'll be 5 years, February 1st. And I live every day with the 15 to 20% risk of recurrence. And I know that if I do have a recurrence, that eventually cancer will probably kill me. And I feel not that there's a silver lining, but some of the things that cancer has taught me is that you don't really have much to fear after the worst things that could ever happen to you. And so I don't live my life in the same way. Before I kind of try to like hide my light or not be my true self in some ways, and I just don't give a hoot anymore. And I think that the cost of cancer, not the financial cost, but I went through menopause. They had to take out, they didn't have to, but I chose to have my ovaries removed. So that was like flipping a menopause switch. So I'm on menopause on steroids, is how I feel right now. My body's aging very rapidly in ways that I was never anticipating. I have plantar fasciitis, I mean, come on, right? But there's all kinds of other health issues. I have sexual and intimacy side effects that I did not realize were going to be so intense. And yes, there are ways to treat them, and it's also, it's a part of my identity as a woman who's very much in love with my wife that I did not anticipate that. So, of course we want to kill the disease, but we don't want to kill the spirit of the person through the treatment either. And I think if that's one thing I can leave you with, is let's find ways to make all of this more humane for the patient. Thank you.
So much. That was just such a brave story. So super honored to have heard that and share stage with you ladies. Next up we have Ms. Mayhoua Moua. She is the Executive Director for the Consortium for Hmong Health. Mayhoua came to the U.S. as a refugee in 1976. As a child, she learned English quickly and became her parents' interpreter and translator. She expanded her skills to her neighbors, extended relatives, and eventually turned her skills and experience into a career where she serves her community through nonprofit organizations, has for the last 30 years. Mayhoua's passion in helping people inspired her to help co-found several nonprofit organizations serving refugees from Southeast Asian countries and serve on several board of directors at local and national levels. Currently, Mayhoua serves as the Executive Director for the Milwaukee Consortium of Hmong Health, which she co-founded with 4 other members back in 2008. So welcome, Mayhoua.
Thank you. And I want to thank all of the planners for including my story today to share. I want to thank all of the speakers before me and all the storytellers from last night as well. I resonated with everything that was said here last night on stage and with all of you here. So thank you for giving us the space. As introduced, I came here as a young refugee child from Laos as a result of the aftermath of Vietnam War. And when we came to this country, we had never been exposed to Western medicine practices at all. And when my people started dying, especially after hearing the word cancer, that was something that's very new to us. And So it became a word of death, a death sentence for us. But in 2006, when we were approached, and a friend of mine asked me to join this group, I was educated that breast and cervical cancers were among one of the few cancers that can be detected early and can be cured. So I got excited because my executive director that I used to work for, his wife had just recently passed away from breast cancer, and we didn't know how to support her. So I was excited, and we got together and we worked on this, and I'm very thankful to my partners that promised to stick with me. If we're going to do this, it would have to be for the long haul. And so thank you, Shannon Sparks. Dr. Shannon Sparks is one of our co-founders, and who is now our board president. I want to share with you, I don't have breast cancer, but I do have family members. My mother's older sister did die of breast cancer. And then my younger sister was diagnosed with breast cancer. She's a survivor for the last 2 years. And last year in December, while I was on vacation, I became sick. I felt bloated. I had two lumps behind my 2 ears. And it became very uncomfortable, especially after 2 weeks on the road. I came home, I was very sick, very tired, lots of headache because the lumps had continued to grow down my neck. So I didn't have any health insurance because our organization is very small. Funding was just not there. My husband is self-employed, but we get by. We couldn't afford health insurance. We didn't qualify for the marketplace. It was just too expensive. So we called my husband's cousin, who was a PA, and he stopped by to check on me. I told him my symptoms. He lifted my pants leg, and I didn't even pay attention to my pants leg. By that time, I had red spots all over my legs. And he said, well, I'm concerned. You need to go into the emergency room tomorrow. Now, this is like 7, 8 o'clock at night. So the next day, my husband took me into the emergency room, but there was just way too many people, sick people. And so I asked him, take me to the urgent care. That might be faster. So we went over to urgent care, not too far from our house. And by that time it was late in the afternoon. The lab had closed, but they were able to draw my blood and put me through x-ray. And then the doctor told me, we'll give you a call tomorrow morning. Well, the next morning around 9 o'clock, the doctor did call me and said, where is the closest emergency room for you? So I told him about the smaller hospital a few blocks away from my house. He called there and they told him, no, we're not, we don't have the capacity to see her here. Send her to the bigger one. So the doctor called me back and sent me to another hospital. There, I spent several hours, and then the oncologist came through after I got my CT scan, more blood work, and x-rays. The oncologist came through with her nurse practitioner, and then they looked at my leg, and then she just did a lot of hand gestures. So I had to ask, so doc, what's going on with me? And she said, well, you have leukemia. I was not surprised because my maternal grandmother died of leukemia 30-some years ago. So I thought, well, cancer runs in my family, so I'm not surprised. I was not even scared. I just needed to feel comfortable from the bloatedness in my stomach and the pain that I was having from the enlarged lymph nodes on my neck. I just needed relief from there. But when she said I have leukemia, I'm like, if she told me I had brain cancer or throat cancer or stomach cancer, I can understand, but leukemia, where did that come from? So I had to ask questions, and I said, well, my maternal grandmother died of leukemia. She said, no, this is not the inheritance kind. I'm like, at that time, I didn't know how many kinds of leukemias there are. And so she had to tell me that it was something that just happens to individuals. It was not something that I would inherit. So that was something for me to digest. And it was a shock because, you know, it was during COVID time. My husband couldn't come into the emergency room with me. I was there alone. I went in for something and I was told something else. Imagine, as an advocate for my community, I didn't know how to advocate for myself at that time. I just pretty much digested it and listened and just laid there and think things through. And then when they decided to admit me into the hospital, the very next day my husband came to visit me, and then we got the news that after, you know, that afternoon, they were banning visitors from the hospital. So here I am in the hospital all by myself with cancer, and my husband was at home by himself, not knowing what to do to help me. And so it was very hard for the two of us because, you know, our kids are grown and they're out of the home, and it's just the two of us supporting each other. But at that time, we felt like our world is falling apart because we did have a dream that we would grow old together and that eventually we will be traveling together, enjoy life, the rest of our lives together. We didn't know what to expect. So that afternoon, I was told that they were starting chemo on me right away. I had to ask, you know, why, you know, what's going on? I mean, what kind of chemo, how often? They said, well, you're gonna be on chemo, IV chemo for 12 hours and then off for 12 hours. And then on again for another 12 hours. And then we're gonna start you with a demon chemo. I'm like, what is that? So I went along with it. When I finally got the chemo, the demon chemo, 2 days later, it was orange. So I'm like, no wonder they call it the demon chemo. I didn't know the name of it at all, but they said, you know, you have to be on this demon chemo for 24 hours, and then you cannot eat or drink anything for 24 hours. By the time I was done with the chemo, I was so hungry, I was starving. And then the 24 hours that I couldn't eat or drink anything, I thought I was gonna die. Not from the disease, but from starvation. And that's when I started thinking about my people and the people that don't speak English. How do they survive? You know, it's pretty much what they probably, many of our elders had gone through in the hospital because they don't know how to ask for food. They don't know how to order food. If their families are not able to bring it, they starve to death. So that's when things started hitting me that God probably put me through this journey to experience it myself so that I can understand the people that we're trying to work with. Put myself in their place. Even as an advocate, I never understood what they have to go through, the kind of pain, the struggle that they have to go through within the homes and within the hospitals and making arrangements. And I'm very lucky that my kids are grown, but imagine all these younger women with little ones like we've heard here, and without any family support. I have to say that I'm very blessed because I have staff who worry about me all the time and they wanted to stop by with food. I have many friends from the Chinese American community, from the Lao community, from my African American neighbors and friends and Caucasian friends. Everybody wanted to bring food, you know, to feed my husband because he's running around, making sure that he's also taking care of himself while he takes care of me, and also feed me to make sure that we're getting nutritious food. And then, as I was getting the chemos, I was also getting all kinds of different medications for antibiotics of, you know, some to protect my liver, my lungs, my kidney, and all that stuff. And then all of a sudden, after some x-rays, I was told that there are some white spots in my gallbladder, so it looks like gallstone. I was also told that there's some white spots in my liver. I'm like, I don't have any pain. I never experienced any of these before. Why are these all coming up now? And so they needed to consult with various specialists. And so the GI team came in and they were so adamant about putting me through surgery to remove the gallstone. I also have the cardio doctor come in, but every time she checks my vitals and my and they put echograms and all the stuff that they check the heart with, and he said, you're going through too much. Now this is the only specialist that didn't force me to do anything. He said, you're going through too much already. I'm not going to put you through anything. We're going to wait until your heart is strong enough and until you are a little bit better. But the GI team is the one that came every morning to check up on me and wanted to get started on the surgery to remove my gallbladder. And I was like, okay, I'm trying to grasp my understanding of what this leukemia is doing to me, all these different treatments that are going on. I don't feel any gallstone pain. So why do I have to do, why are they in such a hurry to do the surgery? So I thought, okay, I better call Beth. Beth Peterman is one of our co-founder, retired nurse practitioner, and I said, Beth, you need to step in and help me because I don't know how to advocate for myself. I don't know how to ask questions because I'm getting all these things and I don't know how they all connect. So, I was able to call my friend and have her step in and help me ask a lot of questions. And then she said, no, let's not do that. Let's make sure that the doctors focus on your leukemia first. So after telling them that I don't want anything except for taking care of my leukemia first, they stopped coming. But then they brought in a surgeon because they were still concerned, and then now they tell me there's a small tumor in my stomach. And then they brought the surgeon in, and she wanted to do surgery to remove the bottom part of my stomach, and then we'll reconnect. And I can understand this part because I went through it with my father-in-law. But then I thought, but I don't feel any pain down there. Why does she want to do surgery on my stomach? And then I had to call Beth again. I said, what's going on? Why are these doctors wanting to do surgery on me and not take care of my leukemia situation first? And she said, well, just stay strong and tell them no. So when I was discharged after 22 days in the hospital, I thought about getting second opinion. I thought, well, let me give Dr. LeConte a call, because they focus on cancer, so I don't know anybody else, so I emailed Dr. LeConte, and thank goodness for the collaborative Carbone. With the connections, she was able to bring in one of her colleagues who specializes in ALL, and that's what I have. And they read through my records, and they said, yes, you're on the right track of treatment. So with that, then I continued working with the oncologist that I'm currently working with. But if I didn't have the connections that I have, I don't know what I would have done. I would have just gone in blind, not knowing what to do, and just let things happen. I could have gotten my gallbladder removed and my stomach's cut in half, like my people would say. So I'm very thankful that I'm very blessed with so many friends and so many connections here. And my families are doing well. I received my transplant in May this year, and I'll be reaching my 6 months next month. So I will start my baby immunizations all over again. So Gail Johnson was scolding me, I shouldn't be here. I know, I'm not supposed to be in crowds, but it's been so long. And I just felt like, God put me in this journey to experience it so that I can share and help people more. And so I had to be here. I felt good, and it's so good to be among all of you. Thank you.
All right, we have our last but not least, we have, here we go, Dr. Debbie Jones. She is a full-time hospitalist with SSM Health. She's a board member of the Foundation for Black Women Wellness, a mother of 3 adult children, and she is a breast cancer survivor herself. So welcome, Dr.
I want to thank you all for giving me and the other women on this panel the gift to tell our story. And this is not my story, this is our story. And when I say our, I mean my family and I. You see, I grew up in a large family on the west side of Chicago. I am number 5 of 8 children, 6 girls and 2 boys. We were raised by a single mother in public housing. And let me tell you, no one expects much of you coming from that kind of background. No one expects anything of you, really. But I want you to know that when you come from that kind of abject poverty like we had and saw, your family becomes the foundation on which you survive. We were each other's eyes and ears and encouragers and protectors. A solid love connected us, and this is how we survived. This family supported my nerdy inclinations for science and chemistry and math, and they thought nothing wrong with my wanting a doctor's kit instead of a doll for Christmas. And they stifled their boredom as I tried to dazzle them with the various potions from my Ellenmeyer flask and pipettes and test tubes from my chemistry sets. They loved me and they cheered me, the only one of us who would graduate from college and go on to med school. I tell you this because I want you to understand that my family is what shaped me into the woman that I am today. And when cancer decided to take up residence in our family, there was no question that we would fight like hell together as we did every other challenge we have ever faced. As a doctor, I thought I understood what it meant to have cancer. I have given that devastating diagnosis to many. Most survive and go on to live meaningful, healthy lives, but some don't. So when my closest sister, Bobby, who was 1 year older than me, when she was diagnosed with breast cancer, you know I did everything I could to help her survive. And yet, I watched powerlessly as my sister's cancer progressed and terminated her life. The loss was overwhelming and devastating and frustrating because we did everything. Early diagnosis, prompt mastectomy, prompt aggressive chemo and radiation, and despite all of that, she died in a medical helicopter that had come to remove her unconscious body from a cruise ship that her church had given her when they learned her disease had progressed. She died not in the safety of our families, but surrounded by strangers. And I grieved greatly. I took no comfort in knowing that I had done everything I could to help her. My medical degree did not protect me from the crushing unimaginable pain I felt in her passing. And fast forward some 10 years later, I too was diagnosed with the same breast cancer that took my sister's life. And at that time, I too was a single mother of 3 precious minor children. I immediately began treatment, but the drugs made me so sick that I was not even able to complete them. My family was devastated as they assumed, and frankly so did I, that my fate would be the same as my sister's. But my fate was not the same. And throughout my journey, I noticed some things that I had not seen or understood during my sister's struggle. When I was first diagnosed, my oncologist asked me to allow people to help me. Now understand, I am a caregiver. And I couldn't imagine I would need anyone besides my family. My oncologist, however, reminded me that I was loved by more than just my family, and that people process their grief by helping me. And it was the best advice he could have given me, even as I tried to shake it off as I walked out of his office. I noticed how people showed up at my door to feed my family when I was really too sick to even deal with food at all. I noticed how my children's friends' parents would pick up my children to take them to movie and play dates to give them respite from their mother's illness. I noticed how people would send me cards to let me know that they were thinking of me. Prior to that, it just never really occurred to me to send cards just to let someone know I was thinking of them or to encourage them through an illness. It just never entered my mind. But each and every card was like a spoken blessing over my life. And I have kept each one of those cards wrapped in a ribbon on my top drawer. And each time my hand runs across those cards, I am truly moved to tears with gratitude. It was the smallest thing that surprisingly meant so very, very much to me. And I also noticed how brave souls stepped in to my dark world just to sit with me. Stephen Atkinson once said that true friends are the rare people who come to find you in the dark place and lead you back to the light. I suffered greatly in my struggle with cancer. The fatigue was nothing that I had ever experienced before or since. When my counts were at their nadir and fever overtook me, I could not find the words to tell my family that I wasn't sure I could survive this. I knew they were worried and afraid for me. I could not add to their sorrows. And so I suffered in silence. My mom would have to help me come down from my bedroom stairs so that I could just be on the couch when my children came home from school. Because I didn't want them to think that I was so sick that I couldn't get out of bed, which I was. And after they would go to sleep, my mom would slowly help me back up to the stairs, back to another fitful night of such profound fatigue that sleep could never erase it. And I'm sure these women who have had chemo know what I mean by that. One night, I was so tired that even to breathe required more strength than I had. And I recall doing the calculus in my head that I would take one breath and I would skip the next two because it was just too much to even breathe. That night, I could feel my spirit hovering over, in and out of my body. I could feel it. And I prayed my most authentic prayer ever, that God would take care of my mom and children, because I did not think I would survive. But when I woke up that next morning, I jumped out of bed with energy I had not had since I was diagnosed. I hardly recognized that woman I saw in the mirror. But I knew that day that my sickness would not be unto death. Not this time. Somehow, with the love of my family and with the grace of God, I survived. And that was 20 years ago. But 3.5 years ago, my younger sister Nina came to me and said, "You have to tell Mom. I can't tell her." She had been diagnosed with breast cancer. And Nina passed away this year on February 16th. I think I was a much better help for Nina, having gone through cancer myself. For example, I helped her get her finances in order before she started chemo. I filled out all of her disability papers. My mom remembers us sitting at the kitchen table getting all that done so that she would have some income during treatment. I was put on all her accounts so I could handle her affairs when she was no longer able. And I was her spokesperson with her job and her friends who would call me to see how she was doing. And toward the end, I moved my sister home with me. Nina passed away in the way that we have always lived, surrounded by the family that has loved us through all the vicissitudes of life. Cancer has taken up residence in my family, and we have struggled mightily to serve it an eviction notice. Nonetheless, I have great hope for the future. My oldest daughter is now a breast oncologist at Cleveland Clinic, and she is doing active research. She is doing active research in breast oncology. And I have met some fascinating researchers who are doing some amazing, amazing things to spare another family of the challenges my family has faced. I really don't know why I have survived breast cancer when my two sisters have passed away. But this experience has changed me as a person and as a doctor. And I have vowed to make every day count. Tomorrow is not promised to any of us. Some of us are more aware of that than others. And when we take time to be truly and fully present in moments that matter most for our patients, for our loved ones, our friends, and those who happen to transiently cross our path, we are allowed a sacred privilege to bear a great witness that will live on, even if the patient does not. I had an aunt who would say, our lives may be the only good sermon some people are ever going to hear. So I leave you with this parting thought. Every encounter with anyone may be the most significant encounter that person may ever have. So let's make it a good one. Let's make it a kind one. Let's make it a loving one. And let's make it a meaningful one. I thank my family for trusting me to tell our story. And I thank you for allowing me to share our story.
Thank you, ladies, so much for your story. You were brave and you were beautiful, and it is an honor to share this stage with you guys. I thank you so much for your stories and for making it out. Can we get a round of applause for these wonderful ladies? Thank you.